This is a trigger warning. We do talk about death and bereavement in this podcast, which may be upsetting to some listeners. Welcome to Faith on the Frontline. Faith on the Frontline is a podcast series focused on providing insight into the real life stories faced by everyday people and the ways in which their faith helped them to overcome the life hurdles that they faced. In this series, we'll be talking about a host of subjects. These will range from coping with debt and the rising cost of living crisis, parenting young people in particular, given societal pressures, through to having an open and honest conversation about mental health or even dealing with death and loss. This 6-part series will talk about real life personal experiences with real life women who will share how their faith helped them through the battles. Our mission here at Faith on the Frontline is to share some of the personal stories of how others have overcome real challenges that many people still face today. And by having these conversations, we hope that you too can find faith in your battles. My name is Ola Rugbu. I'm a mother, a businesswoman, a mentor, and I've been through many of my own battles, from facing my own mortality, having successfully gone through a treatment for cancer, through to going through a divorce and bringing up teenage children as a single parent. And I'm your host for Faith on the Frontline. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a subject that for many people is regarded as taboo, death, and specifically the loss of a loved one. I was faced with my own mortality as a result of a diagnosis for myeloma. My children were faced with the very real possibility of losing their mother, which was difficult and a really frightening time for them. Others have actually lost one of their own loved ones. And there is also a perception in some cultures that grief is hidden and you maintain a stiff upper lip. But there's also an additional perception that as a Christian, that you may grieve, but it's different because you will see your loved one again. And often people refer to 1 Thessalonians 4:13, where Paul talks about brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. But when Paul talks about this, you may not grieve as others do. That doesn't take away from the reality that you have experienced grief due to the loss of a loved one. And there is a pain associated with that grief. So today I'm going to talk to everyone who's going through grief, regardless of who or where you are. And I'm pleased to have with us Paula Oyinkan, who's been through a whirlwind of a year. She's a new wife, new mother, in addition to an affiliate marketing manager. She's a business leader. She's also passionate about Christ and is rediscovering her journey and really wants to share that experience with everybody. And in addition, Paula has also experienced the loss of her father, and she'll be talking about her experience of that loss and how her faith has helped her to deal with that grief. So welcome, Paula. So just to start us off, or before we start, could you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. I feel like you summed it up so nicely. And thank you for having me on the podcast as well. I do really appreciate it and hope I can share some valuable insights and just a bit more about my experience. So, like you said, my name is Paula. I'm a newlywed, a new mother as well. A lot has happened in the space of a year, as you know, Olu. And I'm currently on maternity leave, but I do work as an affiliate marketing manager at a cosmetics company. I've been in digital marketing now, I'd say almost, I think, nearing 6 years. So it's been a while, but I've also been quite interested in business. I have my own business. I've started a few different businesses, and I'm just really passionate about kind of living a life that you enjoy, because I feel like you only get one life. And actually, I think probably I have this view because of the loss of my dad, but not to get into that just yet. But I just feel like life is short and you should do the things that you enjoy, which is why I'm very passionate about having my own businesses. So yeah, that's me.
No, that's fantastic, Paula, and thank you. And you're right, you only have one life, and
Mhm.
life is short. And I really agree that you have to make the best of what you can within this life. So
Mhm.
great, thank you for that introduction. So I'd like to really start to dig in here. So a few things really compared to the pain of losing someone you love. So can you share what happened with our listeners?
Mhm. Yeah, I can. So I think with losing my dad, it was definitely unexpected, but there was kind of like a build up to it as well. So he passed away in 2018, but 2 years prior, 2016, he had like a brain hemorrhage. And even that, it was completely unexpected. The day before my sister called me to tell me he was in hospital, I spoke to him on the phone. He was just his normal self. We had our normal conversation. And then the next thing, early hours of the morning, I got a call to say that he was in hospital. Um, and even at that time, I don't think I really had registered just how serious the situation was when he had the brain hemorrhage. So I was actually in France at the time working as an English language assistant. So I wasn't even in the UK when I got the call. And then the next day, I think it really sunk in more that, oh, this is quite serious. And my mum called me and said, can I come home as well? And I think that also kind of like imprinted the seriousness of the situation into like my mind. So I came home and yeah, like I think because no one in my family, especially our immediate family, had ever been in a serious like medical condition before. So I didn't really know what to expect. I thought maybe it would be like a couple weeks and then he'll be back and out. And so when someone told me it would be like, oh no, like a minimum of 3 months, I thought, oh, wow, like that, it was a shock to me. I wasn't expecting him to be in hospital for so long. And also, I think just not knowing really what a brain hemorrhage was, not experiencing it with anybody before, and not really understanding like the severity of the situation. So it was all a real shock. And funnily enough, during that time, despite like each thing helping me to realize how serious the situation was, I never doubted that he would just come back and be himself, even though there was like situations where the doctors would come because he had to have like a few operations on his brain as well. And the doctors would come and say, like, there's a risk that this could leave him disabled, or a risk that he might not come back from this surgery, like quite serious surgery that he had. Not at one point did I ever feel like he wasn't going to come back and be himself, if that makes sense. And that's not to say that I wasn't scared or I didn't feel anxious or anything like that. I feel like when I look back on the whole situation in reflection, it's more like that was the peace of God in that situation. And I feel like that's one of the most tangible examples of a peace that surpasses all understanding in my life that I can share. And that was definitely how it was during that time. Like, it wasn't an easy period at all. I feel like it was just so stressful, especially for my mum, because obviously this is her life partner. My mum and my dad, they got married when they were quite young. My mum was 21, my dad was 25. So they'd literally been together like almost their whole adult lives. So this was completely unexpected. So yeah, so he had the brain hemorrhage. Like I said, I didn't have any doubt that he was going to come back to himself. It was a real process. One of my prayers during that time was like, God, I just pray that he will walk out of this hospital without any aid, without anything like that. And to God be the glory, he actually did. Like after going through the whole rehabilitation process, physiotherapy, all of that, he walked out of the hospital himself, despite everything that happened. I don't really want to go too deep into the detail of just everything because I would be here all day, but it was a really serious situation. And then over those 2 years, he really like recovered. He was getting more back to himself. He used to always say like he could talk for England, even before that, the brain hemorrhage happened. But after, it was as if like he was just talking so much more. He completely came back to himself. And also like he had a tracheostomy at one point, which is like a breathing tube, just to show the severity of it. And even when they took the tracheostomy out, usually they ease people back onto solid foods because of the length of time he had it on for, but he was able to have like a normal meal right away. And again, that was like another testimony in the situation that his recovery was just so rapid and miraculous. And even if you heard some of the stories he shared after having the brain hemorrhage and coming back, he was just like so on fire for God and just telling everyone about it, like just everything. And it was just so nice after like such a major life-changing event to have him back and to see him progress and to gradually get back to where he was. So when he passed away, that night he went to life group. He was very good with being consistent and stuff. Like he'd been going to life group for years. So he went to life group as he usually does. He came back. I think that night as well, I'd been interviewing for a new role. So that same day before he went to life group, they'd got back to me to say that I got the job. So we were all excited and happy. And then he went to life group, came back. He used to go to bed a lot earlier than the rest of us. And so he went to bed and he was like, good night, family. And that was it. And then once I went to bed, I just remember like waking up and it was just like a lot of frantic voices. My mum was saying like, get Oyinkan, there was just so much going on. But I was woken up in the middle of the night just from like, there was a lot of frantic voices, a lot going on. And then I got out of bed and went to my mum and dad's room and my older sister was there. They were on the phone to the ambulance. Like there was just so much going on. Like it was all a shock because obviously when you wake up to that as well, it's like, what's going on, and you're just like thrown into it. So they were on the phone to the ambulance. My sister was doing chest compressions, that's what they were advising us to do, and we were taking it in turns. Obviously we were all like crying, like what's going on, whilst also trying to do these chest compressions. And then finally the first responders came out and they kind of took over. It's all that night, honestly, it feels like a bit of a blur, but the first responders came in, they had to do the ET, is it like the clear, the chest thing. So they did that. And yeah, like after they came, obviously they did as much as they could, but it was like, no, he's not coming back. And yeah, that was kind of it. And I remember I don't know what you call them, the people that come and get the body, they came as well. And I remember, I think my mum had called some people as well just to say what was going on. So we had some like family friends round as well, like, and they were crying. And I just remember thinking, I mean, maybe it's not the nicest thought, but I just thought to myself, why are you crying? Like, because I just felt like this is my dad. Like, why are you crying? That was just the thought that came into my head. And I guess, I don't know, like, it just felt so bizarre, like everything that had happened leading up to that point. And then I feel like you just kind of have this weird feeling of just kind of like emptiness. I couldn't really process what had happened because, and it was so intense as well, because it wasn't like, oh, I don't know, you know, when you get a call to hear that somebody's passed away or something like that, like we were really there. Like it was like we were actually trying to do the stuff that they tell you to do in these kind of situations. And it was just so much. And then also for it to happen, and bear in mind, like throughout that time, obviously you're praying, because I feel like in these situations, what else can you do? So it's like you're praying whilst you're doing chest compressions and you're literally begging God, like, God, please just let him come back. Don't let this happen. Like that's how it was. And then when it's like your prayer didn't get answered, you can't even really explain it, because you know when you've got a strong faith and it's like you pray and a lot of the time God always answers your prayers, or maybe it's like he doesn't answer it at that time but something better happens or just something like that. And I think this was like the first time where it was really like, wow, my prayer just didn't get answered at this point. Do you know what I mean? And it was just surreal. I don't even know what next to say. Like it was so intense of a situation, and obviously as somebody that you love dearly and you would never expect this to happen. And then I remember the next day, like a lot of people just came round again trying to show support, but my feelings were just like, why is everyone here? Because in that time, I know obviously after the time you reflect and you're like, yeah, it's nice that everyone came to support and all of that. But I think in that time, it just felt to me like, why is everyone here? Because the next day when the house was full of people, no one was saying anything. It's like we were all just there and just sat in silence. And it just felt like, why is everyone here? To
Mm,
me, that's kind of what was going through my mind. And like I said, even though I felt God didn't answer my prayer in that moment, I never felt like, oh, God doesn't exist or anything like that. Obviously, I still had my faith and stuff, but I still, at the end of that first day after he had died, I remember me and my sisters were in the kitchen, and
mm,
I felt like, oh, it's nice that everyone's praying and stuff, and it's all great, but it's not going to bring my dad back.
yeah,
That's how I felt.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I
And
think that's just the truth. That's my real raw feeling at that time.
yeah, and that's a really good point, Paula. So, given that you talked about the fact that your dad had been, unwell and gone through the treatment initially, and God had stepped in and helped him,
Mm-hmm.
did you feel a sense of anger towards God because he'd helped your dad all through those other times? And
Mm-hmm.
did you ever come to that point where you felt angry because you felt that God had let you down? Did that emotion ever occur?
Honestly, when I reflect, I don't think I ever felt anger towards
Mm,
God
mm,
because I guess my mindset is always that I know that things happen for a reason, and I don't think it was an anger, it was more a feeling of I just don't understand. Like, I don't understand why this has happened. Like, I didn't feel angry like, oh God, you took my dad away. I just felt like, why didn't you answer my prayer, or why did he die? Like, and I felt like, why did he go through that brain hemorrhage and like fully recover and then just to die? Like, I didn't get it. So I
mm,
wouldn't say it was an anger. I feel like it was more a feeling of like confusion and not understanding. And
mm,
I think that kind of led me to realize as well that when it comes to God, like, we don't have all the answers, and there's no way to ever fully understand why things happen. And I've come to a point where I just kind of accept the fact that
mm,
it may not make sense to me, but that's because we as human beings, we can't understand God completely because he's God. Do you know
mm,
what I mean? So that's kind of where I was. I don't feel like I've ever felt anger. And I feel like in that time, despite, like I said, not feeling like my prayer was answered when it came to like my dad not dying, I felt like we still leaned on God in that time, like, because you still need God in that time to be able to
mm,
overcome the feelings that are involved with like loss and stuff like that, and just to not to push them down as well. Like, I feel like you have to go through those emotions, and even though like you lean on God and God is part of the process, it doesn't mean you can't feel sad or upset that that person is not there, or like you can't be angry. Like, even though I didn't feel angry, maybe some
mm,
people do feel angry, and I don't think there's anything wrong with having that
mm,
anger or having that feeling of confusion or frustration or disappointment, because they're real human emotions, and I think it's important to go through that when you're grieving somebody.
of course. And you're right. You talk about the whole range of emotions and important to go through that grief. So would you said, they often talk about the various stages of grief, from the initial shock to the not knowing how to feel. Did you go through those changes in that order, or was it just a whole melee or medley of different emotions that you're experiencing at the same time?
I think, to be honest, I don't know like all the actual stages of grief or what order they happen in, but I know like people have the anger and like things like that, the sadness, the realization, and I think like with me personally, it was like a mixture of emotions that just happen at different times. So there might be a feeling of like, okay, this day I'm feeling really sad, I'm crying, I'm upset, I'm confused. And then the next day it's like, okay, well, everything happens for a reason. I know that at least we got him back for those 2 years, but then later that day you're feeling sad again. And I feel like it was just a mixture of different feelings and a
Mm,
lot of up and down. And I
mm,
think aside from like, having my faith and stuff like that, I do feel blessed that um my family, we're quite close, like my immediate family. So at least we also had each other throughout that time, and we were able to like talk about our feelings. If one of us was upset, then obviously we just shared it. And yeah, it was just at least we had the support system of each other as well. I think that's quite important.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, having that support system is really, really key. And that was
Mhm.
one of the questions I wanted to ask you. So it's great that you had your family there and that you could talk through those emotions and those
Mm.
feelings. Did you lean on any other support, or was there any other support available to you? And if so, what kind of support did you tap into?
Um, Honestly, I'm not even too sure. I'm trying to think because it was almost 5 years ago now. And I think there was a lot of support more, I'd say, like for my mum. She
Mm,
joined like Christian Widows.
mm,
Somebody referred her to that. So I think that helped her a lot as well.
mm,
Um, and I think for me personally, I can't really remember joining any group specifically. But at that time, I was like, part of life group. I'm still part of life group
mm,
now, but obviously having a baby, it's like you can't do things the way you used to.
yeah,
Um, but like my life group, I'd say was really supportive. And I think also my friends, I didn't actively seek any kind of
mm,
outside support. So I don't know. I couldn't advise on what is there, but I know that there is a lot of support for like widows and
mm,
things and young people as well. Because when my dad died, my younger sister, I think she was like 16 doing her GCSEs, so she's
mm,
quite young at that time, and I'm sure like the school would have provided support.
mm,
And I think with these kind of things, it's hard because I don't think people actively come to you to say, oh, you should do this. Oh, we do this for people like you because they don't know. So you do kind of need to look for it yourself. And I
mm,
think if you don't look for it, then you probably won't know about it. But I do think that there is support out there.
mm,
And I think even aside from like, I guess seeking support specifically for like bereavement,
mm,
that I think everyone should do counselling. I mean, this is even something I'm saying to myself because it's not something I've actively done, but I think counselling is quite important because it allows you a space to actually just talk about your feelings to somebody who is not biased and
mm,
they don't have an emotional involvement in the situation you're talking about. So I think counselling is quite important, especially when you've been through such major like life things, and death is a major life thing. So
mm.
yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. And it's a really, really good point, Paula, that some people, when they go through their grief, they feel that they have to do it all by themselves.
Mm,
But you're talking about the importance of you had your family around you, you had
mhm.
your friends, and also tapping into external support system where they're
Yeah,
available, and really recognizing that you don't have to do this by yourself. And in addition,
yeah.
leaning on your faith, which was crucial for you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And even church, I didn't even mention that, but I feel like church, I mean, life group is part of church anyway, but I think church, depending on the church you go to, but obviously with our church, they're quite good with these things. They have like bereavement courses and stuff like that as well.
Of course, absolutely. And for those people who are listening and don't go to church, can you just explain a little bit about what life groups are?
Oh,
So that'd
yeah.
be really useful for them.
Yeah, of course. I feel like I always just say life group as if everybody
Yeah.
knows what it is.
Yeah.
But I'd say life group is basically just like a small group within our church. So basically, obviously you've got the big church, and then within that,
Mm,
they've got like smaller groups of people that meet up. So some life groups are like based on area. So people in a certain area of Peterborough, they meet up. But my life group is I joined them because it was like a young adults life group. So within young adults, they break us into smaller groups. So that's essentially what life group is, just a group of people meeting up at church. Yeah.
no, fantastic. Thank you for that, Paula, and thank you for explaining that, which is great. So again, just in terms of, so we talked about, the support systems that you had and leaning on God, but and again, we also talked about some of the range of emotions that you experience having gone through this. But
Mm.
one of the things that we note is that grief is not just limited to the emotional elements, but there's also a physical element as well. So, was there any sort of physical reactions that you experienced having gone through,
Mm.
the loss of your father?
I don't think I went through anything
Mm,
physically. I know some people like maybe because I think with me,
Mm,
I didn't physically go through things, but I did notice like maybe it's harder to fall asleep because you're just thinking about what's happened
mm,
and that kind of thing. And I did notice with my mum as well more that she kind of wasn't eating as much.
mm,
Um, and she just and I can understand why. Like I feel like my dad going, that's literally her life partner. Like
mm,
I can understand why it would really massively, massively impact her. And they were really close as well. Like they bounced ideas off of each other. They, like I said, they got married when she was like 21. It's so young. And he was 24, 25. So
mm,
they're so young. And he died when he was just almost 5 years ago now. So he would have been 53 when he died.
yeah,
So at that point, they were married almost 30 years.
mm,
And I think she went through things more in terms of like the physical side
mm,
than I did. So like they're not eating, they're not really sleeping. But the thing is, all of that, like I wouldn't even be concerned if that happened after somebody lost someone because it's understandable. Like
mm,
you can't eat because you're not thinking about food. You're not thinking about, oh, I'm hungry. And sometimes you're not even hungry because it's just
mm,
you're just thinking about what you've been through, what's happened, like how can this person be gone? Because with death, I think that's when you realize it's like, so this person is like gone. It's not like they've just moved to another country and you
mm,
might see them in a year or two. It's like they're just gone, you know?
mm,
So, and I think also around that time we were all having a lot of dreams about my dad.
mm.
Um, because I guess he was like really on the forefront of our mind as well. And I think I guess that is a physical thing, but I think it's more of like I don't know if mental would be included in physical, because that's what I would class a dream as, more like a mental thing. I don't think there was anything specifically physical for me per se, but definitely my mum.
No, thank you for that, Paula. So, in terms of, again, in terms of the emotion, and you talked quite a bit about that. And again, for somebody going through this, something similar in terms of what you've experienced, do
Mm.
those emotions, do you get to a point where you start to heal? At what point does that pain stop, or does it never go away? Or at what point does the intensity of that pain start to
Mm.
subside?
I think that's such a hard question because I
Mm,
don't feel like it really ever goes. Like I feel like grief is such a weird thing because like you said, you'll never forget that person and
mm,
you never stop feeling sad that they're not there. I don't feel like there's a specific point that I could pinpoint and say like, yeah, after 2 weeks, after 3 months, you'll be fine. Because the way I see it, I think it's more like you don't ever really get over that loss. You just grow as a person and your life just carries on. So I saw like a good analogy of this. Like it was a picture, so I'll try and describe the picture. But basically, like grief is like, let's say, a ball
mm,
inside of a jam jar, and like the jam jar is your life at the time of losing somebody. But then as you grow, as you progress, like that ball is still the same size, but maybe like your life gets bigger. So like instead of it being in a jam jar, it's like now a paint can or something, which is significantly bigger than a jam jar, but the ball is still the same size. Do you know what I mean? So like the grief is still the same, but because life has like carried on, you've got new experiences, you've got new things happening in life. Like you will be happy and you'll overcome that feeling slightly, but it's still there. Do you know what I mean? Like
mm,
even now, like with all of this stuff that's happened in my life in the past year, like getting married, having a baby, I think even more so now than in like some of the past years, I think to myself, like, oh, I would just love to see what my dad would be like with my baby. Like, I would love to know, like, how my husband and my dad would get on. Like, I think that quite a lot because sometimes like when I see my husband the way he is, I think, oh, like that's something my dad would do. Like I feel like you guys would really get on. I wish that you knew him, do you know? And
mm,
I think that will always happen. Like as I have more kids, I'll still think the same thing. Like And I guess even as my kids grow up and I see more of what their personality is like, maybe one of them might behave similarly to my dad, and I'll think, oh, like, yeah, that's something my dad would do. So I don't think it ever really grows. I think you kind of just like carry on with life, but that's still there.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's a really, really good analogy, Paula. So just again in terms of summary, so what advice would you give to someone going through
Mhm.
bereavement? So if you were to, again, just looking at, somebody who is just going through this newly, or even it doesn't even need to be newly, but just going through this, and you were to share some words of wisdom, what would that be?
Mhm. I think firstly, I honestly would recommend getting counselling. I didn't get it at the time, but I think as I've gotten older and just as I've progressed in life and done different things, I see the benefits of counselling across the board. Like, because sometimes you can suppress feelings so much and they come out in another way, like later on down the line, even if it is
Mm,
a few years later. So
mm,
it's important to actually deal with those feelings and emotions at the time of going through the grief. I don't think you should try and suppress it. And I think being somebody like of Nigerian background, a lot of people came, and although it's like they're coming like with goodwill and they're like, oh, you have to be strong for your mum, you have to be strong for your sister. But
mm.
honestly, I think that's the worst piece of advice you could give to somebody that's grieving.
Yeah.
Like, I just can't express it enough. And it's not being done in a malicious way, but I think telling people to be strong when they're going through something hard is it's just a horrible thing to do. I think the advice should actually be like, you need to express how you feel. If you feel sad, it's okay to feel sad. If you feel angry, it's okay to feel angry. And you need to go through those emotions so that you can come out of the other side. So that would honestly be my advice. Like, don't try and be strong if you don't feel strong.
Mm.
Like, don't try and do something that you don't feel. Just be honest about how you're feeling. If you're feeling sad, that's okay. If you're feeling angry, it's okay.
Just going back, certainly in terms of the Black community, and when you go through this, there is this feeling that you have to be strong.
Mm-hmm.
And you make a really good point that actually you've got to show your emotions and
Yeah.
feel. So I'd just like to explore that a little bit more with you,
Mm-hmm.
Paula.
Yeah, no, definitely. I completely agree. I think when it comes to things like counseling and even just expressing your emotions in the Black
Mm,
community, it can be like very taboo. And actually, to even go a bit deeper, sometimes, like as a Black woman, there's this whole strong, independent Black woman thing. And sometimes you don't want to show your weakness or your vulnerability because you're meant to be strong and independent. But I don't think having emotion it shows you as weak. If,
yeah.
in fact, sometimes expressing that vulnerability is a strength. So I think it's really important that when you're going through grief, when you're going through hard times, that we are just open about expressing how we feel, whether it's a taboo in the Black community or not. I think sometimes we need to just take the situation as it is and just be real. Like, if you're sad, you're sad. If you're happy, you're happy. If you're down, you're down. And there's nothing wrong with feeling that way, especially when it comes to grief.
Absolutely. That is so important. Have those conversations. We speak to the Black community as well. We do
Yeah.
know that it's a taboo and it's hiding behind the family, really about not showing vulnerabilities to the wider public. And
Mhm.
actually, by talking, it means that people are getting the right level of help that they need,
Yeah. Hmm.
rather than suffering alone. When people suffer alone, it hurts them in terms of their mental health. And so, again, you've made a really good point there, not
Hmm.
just in terms of talking, not just in terms of getting support, and also in terms of leaning on God and your faith through this period. So, it's
Yeah.
making sure that you're utilizing all of those and leaning on every single one of those in order to get you through and help get you through this grief. And I think that's a
Yeah.
really important message that we have to impress upon
Hmm.
everybody, and also specifically people within the Black community.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And I think you kind of have to remember as well that life does go on. Like, you need to still live your life. And I think for me, one thing that helps me still live my life and keep pushing forward with my dreams is that I know that's what my dad would want. My dad wouldn't want me to just be locked up in my room, not doing anything. Like, he always used to say, "Oh, I'm gonna do great things." So that pushes me more. Okay, my dad, he said that I would do great things. Let me be proactive. Let me try and do great things. Let me try and live my life to the fullest. So it's not like something I would regret. And I know that it's something that he would be proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. That is absolutely fantastic, Paula, and really, really good insight there. So certainly in terms of the counselling, and just express yourself, don't bottle it up, and just
Mhm.
live your life. As you say, you know that your dad wanted the best for you, and just really, really looking at that, and just going out and just experiencing life. And for
Mhm.
me, it's making an impact. And certainly in terms of what I'm seeing and all the things that you're doing so far, you're certainly making that impact. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your experience, and I know that's going to be of real value to somebody who's going through what you've already been through. Thank
Thank
you.
you so
Thank
much, and
you.
I appreciate it. Honestly, I think it's good to speak about these kind of things and not hold it in, because the thing with death is that literally everyone is going to experience it in their lifetime, and it's not something that is openly discussed. So I appreciate you even creating this platform to talk about these tough topics, and thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you to all our contributors and supporters. Paula Oyinkan, Peter and Hannah Ibbotson. The soundtrack is called Our God is Good and is provided by Jemi Nwadike, and you can find her music on Spotify. If you would like to access support and resources on any of the themes discussed during this podcast series, go to our website, which is www.faithotfl.com. That's www.faithotfl.com. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to you joining us on our next podcast.